Hello, everybody, and I am back with belonging, and I would like to get back into Morella. And regarding Morella, we read like only the first 4 pages or so, and there were a whole bunch of words I didn't understand. I looked up most of them, and I think I have a better understanding of what this is. In the act of trying to understand, I realized that this is a Edgar Allan Poe story, so that kind of reveals that this is going to be spooky, if it wasn't already getting a little spooky. I still don't know what the Plato Symphos things means because I didn't try and like specifically look up meaning in the poem, just not poem, but in the story. I just tried to look up meaning of specific words. So I'll just go over what was going on so far. So this guy met this woman Morella, and this woman Morella was he goes a little bit into the fact that he says uh, with the meeting, I burned with fires my heart had never known before, but the fires were not of Eros. Apparently, Eros is like a god of like carnal love and sexual desire. So he's saying like he likes this woman sort of more as a friend, a very good friend, a confusing sort of feeling. But they do end up getting married, and that made them happy. Morella's a super nerd scholar, and he ends up getting into what she's already into by proxy, sort of, or not by proxy, but by just by being close to it, being close to her, and that is in German philosophical works, and weird ones at that, from what I looked into, like old ones where it's complicated. Um, and he's sort of just doing it because he's with Morella. He wouldn't do it otherwise, but he's getting weird, creepy feelings from these stories as he's and not stories from these philosophical works as he's reading them with her. Um, and he says the most beautiful became the most hideous as Hinnon became Gehenna. Apparently, that's a Jewish thing about a valley in like the that is important in the Jewish faith that was cursed because some people did horrible things, and then it became a horrible place called Gehenna. Yeah. So he's referencing that the beauty of his relationships seems to be turning somewhat horrific. Uh, and they continue to get more and more in depth in these ideas, and he then, as we leave off, he's wondering about whether or not the nature of an individual is lost on death, or whether there's something else, I guess, or can where it can be retained. And that's where we leave off. So, without further ado, I'll get right back into it. But indeed, the time had now arrived when the mystery of my wife's manner oppressed me as a spell. I could no longer bear the touch of her wan fingers, nor the low tone of her musical language, nor the luster of her melancholy eyes. And she knew all this, but did not upbraid. She seemed conscious of my weakness or my folly, and, smiling, called it fate. She seemed also conscious of a cause, to me unknown, for the gradual alienation of my regard, but she gave me no hint or token of its nature. Yet was she woman and pined away daily. In time the crimson spot settled steadily upon the cheek, and the blue veins upon the pale forehead became prominent, and one instant my nature melted into pity, but in next I met the glance of her meaning eyes, and then my soul sickened and became giddy with the giddiness of one who gazes downward to some dreary and unfathomable abyss. Shall I then say that I longed with an earnest and consuming desire for the moment of Morella's decease? I did, but the fragile spirit clung to its tenement of clay for many days, for many weeks and irksome months, until my tortured nerves obtained the mastery over my mind, and I grew furious through the delay. and with the heart of a fiend, cursed the days and hours and the bitter moments, which seemed to lengthen and lengthen as her gentle life declined, like shadows in the dying of the day. But one autumnal evening, when the winds lay still in heaven, Morella called me to her bedside. There was a dim mist over all the earth, and a warm glow upon the waters, and amid the rich October leaves of the forest, a rainbow from the firmament had surely fallen. "It is a day of days," she said, as I approached. "A day of all days, either to live or die. It is a fair day for the sons of earth, life. Ah, more fair for the daughters of heaven." And I kissed her forehead, and she continued, "I am dying, yet shall I live." "Morella!" "The days have never been when thou couldst love me. But her whom in life thou didst abhor, in death thou shalt adore." "Morella!" "I repeat, I am dying, but within me is a pledge of that affection, how little, which thou didst feel for me, Morella. And when my spirit departs, shall the child live, thy child and mine, Morella's. But thy days shall be days of sorrow, that sorrow which is the most lasting of impressions, as the cypress is the most enduring of trees. For the hours of thy happiness are over, and joy is not gathered twice in a life, as the roses of Paestum twice in a year. Thou shalt no longer, then, play the time with time, but being ignorant of the myrtle and the vine, thou shalt bear about with thee thy shroud on the earth, as do the Muslimin at Mecca." "Morella!" I cried. "Morella, how knowest thou this?" But she turned away, her face upon the pillow, and a slight tremor coming over her limbs, she thus died, and I heard her voice no more. I'm not sure if she was angry at him or what emotion she was feeling there, but she could tell that he didn't feel an easily describable love for her, and especially at the end, he felt horror towards her. But I don't know if he's crying, "How knowest thou this?" or about his feelings, or if he's asking that about how she knows that he's going to no longer feel joy. Yet, as she had foretold, her child, to which in dying she had given birth, which breathed not until the mother breathed no more, her child, a daughter, lived. And she grew strangely in stature and intellect, and was the perfect resemblance of her who had departed. And I loved her with a love more fervent than I had believed it possible to feel for any denizen of earth. Okay, I think we can already tell that the child is the mother, and that got reincarnated into this child. But ere long the heaven of this pure affection became darkened, and gloom and horror and grief swept over it in clouds. I said the child grew strangely in stature and intelligence. Strange indeed was her rapid increase in bodily size, but terrible, oh, terrible were the tumultuous thoughts which crowded upon me while watching the development of her mental being. Could it be otherwise when I daily discovered in the conceptions of the child the adult powers and faculties of the woman? When the lessons of experience fell from the lips of infancy? And when the wisdom or the passions of maturity I found hourly gleaming from its full and speculative eye? When, I say, all this became evident to my appalled senses, when I could no longer hide it from my soul, nor throw it off from those perceptions which trembled to receive it, is it to be wondered at that suspicious of a nature fearful and exciting crept in upon my spirit, or that my thoughts fell back aghast upon the wild tales and thrilling theories of the entombed Morella? I snatched from the scrutiny of the world a being whom destiny compelled me to adore, and in the rigorous seclusion of my home, watched with an agonizing anxiety over all which concerned the beloved. And as the years rolled away, and I gazed day after day upon her holy and mild and eloquent face, and pored over her maturing form. Day after day did I discover new points of resemblance in the child to her mother, the melancholy and the dead. And hourly grew darker these shadows of similitude, and more full and more definite and more perplexing and more hideously terrible in their aspect. For that her smile was like her mother's I could bear, but then I shuddered at its too perfect identity. That her eyes were like Morella's I could endure, but then they too often looked down in the depths of my soul with Morella's own intense and bewildering meaning, and in the contour of the high forehead, and in the ringlets of the silken hair, and in the wan fingers which buried themselves therein, and in the sad musical tones of her speech, and above all, above all, in the phrases and expressions of the dead on the lips of the loved and living, I found food for consuming thought and horror, for a worm that would not die. Thus passed away 2 lustra of her life, and as yet my daughter remained nameless upon the earth. My child, my love, were the designations usually prompted by a father's affection, and the rigid seclusion of her days precluded all other intercourse. Morella's name died with her at her death. Of the mother I had never spoken to the daughter. It was impossible to speak. Indeed, during the brief period of her existence, the latter had received no impressions from the outward world, save such as might have been afforded by the narrow limits of her privacy. But at length the ceremony of baptism presented to my mind, in its unnerved and agitated condition, present deliverance from the terrors of my destiny. And at the baptismal font I hesitated for a name, and many titles of the wise and beautiful, old and modern times, of my own and foreign lands, came thronging to my lips, with many, many fair titles of the gentle and the happy and the good. What prompted me then to disturb the memory of the buried dead? What demon urged me to breathe that sound, which in its very recollection was wont to make ebb the purple blood in torrents from the temples to the heart? What fiend spoke from the recesses of my soul, when amid those dim aisles, and in the silence of the night, I whispered within the ears of the holy man the syllables, Morella? What more than fiend convulsed the features of my child, and overspread them from hues of death, as starting at the scarcely audible sound, she turned her glassy eyes from the earth to the heaven, and falling prostrate on the black slabs of our ancestral vault, responded, I am here. Distinct, coldly, calmly distinct, fell those few simple sounds within my ear, and thence like molten lead rolled hissingly into my brain. Years, years may pass away, but the memory of that epoch, never. Nor was I indeed ignorant of the flowers and the vine, but the hemlock and the cypress overshadowed me night and day, and I kept no reckoning of the time or place, when the stars of my fate faded from heaven, and therefore the earth grew dark, and its figures passed by me like flitting shadows, and among them all I beheld only Morella. The winds of the firmament breathed but one sound within my ears, and the ripples upon the sea murmured evermore, Morella. But she died, and with my own hands I bore her to the tomb, and I laughed with a long and bitter laugh, as I found no traces of the first in the channel where I laid the second, Morella. The end. Huh. I didn't, for the most part, didn't feel anything until that very last bit of I found no traces of the first in the channel where I laid the second. But that kind of got me. So really, I like that little end line a lot. But overall, pretty simple story after understanding some of the words in here of scholarly philosophy lady who is really kind of creepy, and then when she dies, she's reborn in this child, and then the kid dies too, and it's spooky. That's about what I got out of that. Uh, I liked reading a more modern piece because after reading all the other stuff that was not as modern, this feels a lot easier to understand. It rolls off the tongue better. So I think we'll leave it at that. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in later.